So today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the work that I do now, where I sort of the roots come from, and how I sort of envision where we're going. So I'm just going to share my screen as I go. I want you to know that the slides are not, particularly in any order. So don't try to find too much meaning in them as we go. They're just sort of to navigate me through where we're going. And also, if anybody has any questions at all as we go, please feel free to drop them in the chat. I'm happy for this to be as conversational as it can be. And otherwise, we'll just go right through this. So I am currently the CEO of an organization called Interform. It was formerly known as the Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum and Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. And as Judy read in my bio, you didn't hear the word fashion at all in any of the description of what it is exactly that I do. And that's because my background is specifically in arts curation. And it's been a kind of interesting and curvy road to get where I am now. But the focus of what Interform is doing now, and the reason why we changed the name, is that we truly believe in the intersection of art, fashion, and community as a sort of a hybrid space that provides more opportunity for growth and development and community engagement than any of those spaces individually. So to just talk a little bit about who I am and how I got here, I started out my career in art as an artist, very, very young, very early on. And around 18, 19, I got involved in an organization called Artemis. I helped found that. I helped turn it into a nonprofit. And it was really my first foray into like truly collaborative programming, and has really set the tone for basically everything I've done since then. Most people, I don't know if most people base the rest of their career on something they did when they were 18, but I really feel like the format, it did something for me. It sort of unlocked an understanding of what community can be and art can be. So Artemis is an organization that basically just does open calls for artists from the Northwest Arkansas area to do semi-annual art shows across all kinds of mediums, painting and photography and fashion and food and sculpture and film and music. It was kind of all the things. And what I didn't know when we were doing it was how magical that sort of intersection of all those different kinds of art forms was. I was just very intuitively sort of doing the thing that felt really great to do with the group of artists that I was working with at the time. But what I learned as I moved through the rest of my career is that the art community, the art world, really isn't necessarily built on collaboration, and it's not necessarily built on community. And so that idea of art as a space for the creation of community became a kind of cornerstone of what it is I did as I grew along in my career. So as Judy mentioned, I moved to New Orleans. I worked on a biennial, an international contemporary art biennial called Prospect New Orleans. That opened in 2008. I was 24 at the time, so it really, really catapulted my career from being somebody who ran a small arts organization in Fayetteville, Arkansas, to being somebody working on an international contemporary art biennial. Was a really huge jump. And from there, I sort of catapulted to working in the international contemporary art business. I did a few retrospective shows with artists from Asia, across Europe. I lived in Manhattan for a while, lived in New Orleans, moved to the Netherlands briefly, worked at a contemporary art institution there, and then returned to the States, got my master's degree in curating, and through a windy road ended up back in Northwest Arkansas. And when I came back to Northwest Arkansas, I was really sort of wondering whether or not the art space was the space I wanted to continue inhabiting. The thing that I noticed about contemporary art as it exists as an industry is that it is very divorced from community. It's very divorced from like the daily lived realities of people. That's something I say a lot, the daily lived reality, as something I'm very interested in, and how people are navigating their lives, right? So contemporary art sort of sits on a shelf above that. And I've always really wanted to be involved directly in community. So as I came back in 2014 and thought about what it was I was going to do, I happened to pick up a small brand. There we go. I picked up a small brand called Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week was founded in 2012, not by myself. It was founded as an organization that worked with local boutiques to sort of put all of their shows into one evening and have a very, very fancy fashion event. And it was when I was looking at it as an organization that I might be interested in sort of reviving, it kind of hit all the notes of things that I wouldn't usually be interested in. It was very exclusive. It was really catered to a kind of specific community. It didn't really have anything to do specifically with the arts. It was very much about retail, which is a space that I don't truly know that much about, if I'm honest. But the more I was looking at the images of it, and the more I was looking at, what could it be, not what it was, but what could it be, I started to realize that the fact that fashion is so exclusive, and the fact that fashion is known to be so sort of difficult to break into and so exclusionary, if we want to be honest, might actually propose a kind of interesting opportunity to completely subvert the expectations of what an organization in the fashion space could do. So when I sort of picked it up, I immediately made the decision that, okay, so I'm going to take over Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. I know nothing about fashion. I'm an art curator. I'm going to do this as a little project to see if it works, see if I can spend a couple years sort of pushing on the boundaries of what's possible in Northwest Arkansas. And if I can keep it financially viable, then maybe this will be my job. And if not, I'll do something else. So that's sort of the attitude I went into it with. And one of the things that was really motivating me at the time was, after having been so many places and then coming home, and Northwest Arkansas really is home to me. I grew up on a dairy farm in Siloam Springs. So I also have a very specific connection to this place, a specific connection to the land in this place and to the communities of this place. So in coming home, the thing that I really noticed that I'd never noticed living here before was how homogenous the images that the community showed back to itself were. So not necessarily that I believe the community is homogenous, but that in the sort of representative images that the area produces were very, to be very frank, were very white. And specifically with the organization Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week, there was a largely homogenous group of images that had been created by that organization to represent itself, and they were really lacking in diversity. And so, I made a mental note to myself that no matter what I did with the organization, no matter what direction we went, no matter what happened, we would always have at the core of what we did a need and a drive to have diversity in all of our images. So that's sort of where we started. And to be, to be honest, when we rebooted Fashion Week, it was incredibly scrappy. This, for instance, is one of our first photo shoots. That is a bathing suit that was owned by a friend of mine. That is her jewelry closet. That's my friend Katura, who just happens to be a lovely lady that was already in my network. This is my backyard. This was shot by a friend of mine. And it was, we were using the tools we had at hand to create images that would hopefully change the understanding of what this was going to be, right? So we actually spent 6 months just in the mode of image production before we even started doing any kinds of events. And one of the things that was really important to us was the elevation and the centering of diverse people from the community to really, really start to push back on the sort of normalized image of beauty in Northwest Arkansas. This is another shoot that we did really early on. And, if we're honest, I did the makeup for this shoot. Half of those clothes are mine. This was in the second floor of a bakery in Prairie Grove. That they just happened to have like a really dusty, very cool second floor that they volunteered for us to use for the evening. And so myself and a group of young women who were interested in creating some interesting images got together, used what we had, which wasn't much, frankly. And we really pushed on image production, because knowing that fashion replicates itself through the production of images, the goal was really like, just get as many images as you can into the marketing sphere, right? Go ahead and lead through a diversification effort, and let's see what happens. And so as that process took place, the really beautiful and incredibly exciting thing happened, that people started coming out of the woodwork to get involved, because they were all of a sudden seeing representations of themselves or representations of people that looked like them that they hadn't been seeing. And so the thing we hit upon was the ability to show the community back to itself in a way that elevated it. And people want to be involved in that. People want to be elevated. People want to be beautiful. People want to be fancy and fabulous. They want to get involved in that kind of fantasy making of like what is possible. And so as we went, we just kept moving the goalpost on what we wanted to accomplish. So this obviously is a much, much more ambitious photo shoot than the one previously, but the one previously led to this one because people could see that we were doing something that wasn't being done. We were pushing on boundaries that weren't being pushed, and they wanted to get involved. So this photo shoot, for instance, is two designers, Amy Johnson of Ames Design and Ashley Little of Ellen Elaine is the name of her brand. And I called them up one day and said, if I found a mansion for us to do a photo shoot in, would you want to create some sort of Marie Antoinette inspired garments for a fantasy sort of photo shoot? And of course, they jumped in with both feet. And so, we were able to do this very large photo shoot right before the first Fashion Week launched. And so all of these images are produced before we'd even had an event. And the reason behind that was to continue to say, like, we're going to increase the production value. We're going to keep setting the expectations higher. But then also every time you see an image from us, you need to expect that there's going to be individuals represented that you previously may not have expected to be in that space. So then we launched Fashion Week, the actual event in 2017. And I use this image because I feel like it is pretty much a summation of what that first Fashion Week was about and sort of tone setting for where we went. So as you can maybe see, Amanda in the top right corner in Amy Johnson's design is later here on the runway. So all of those clothes were made for runway. She's here represented on the runway. The other half of Amy Johnson's show was this really beautiful collaboration that she did with the Elizabeth Richardson Center, where she took five adults from their programming to create specific garments for them. And we worked one-on-one with them to help train them to model, essentially. And so if you're not familiar with what the Elizabeth Richardson Center is, it is a sort of a jobs training program for adults with differential learning abilities. And so the beautiful thing about the relationship she has with the Elizabeth Richardson Center is that her daughter is involved in their programming, and she is a long time volunteer there. So when she came to me with the idea of putting people with special needs on the runway, I was at first concerned about whether or not the experience would be positive for them. But then after meeting the group of people and working with them over the course of several months, I said, okay, fine, yes, this is actually going to be absolutely brilliant. So so we created this amazing opportunity for 5 individuals to walk the runway in our very first runway show. And the sort of flag that we wanted to plant was that we're not going to do fashion as you understand fashion. We're going to do fashion as a way to create the largest, broadest environment that we can, with an understanding that everybody has to be involved in fashion in one way or another. Fashion is an art form, but it's also like the fact of the matter, right? We all have to get up and get dressed every day. So the entry point to fashion is much lower for a standard community than contemporary art, for instance, which is just can be really, really difficult for people to access. So moving forward, we continued to do runway shows. We continued to do photo shoots that were consistently tracking, they were consistently tracking a path towards greater inclusivity. But all the time we were doing this, we were never speaking about inclusivity as the goal. And we were very, very reluctant to use diversity language in our advertising. I still feel very conflicted about it, if I'm honest. And the reason behind that is I didn't want to tell people that we were doing something before we did it. And I also didn't want people to think that the reason we were working with people was for any kind of tokenized understanding of getting them involved in our programming. Our programming is very much not about finding communities and absorbing them into what we're doing. Our programming is very much about creating opportunities that already directly align with projects, concepts, desires, goals, dreams of communities as they exist. So, the benefit of how we went about doing this was through very strategic image production and through very strategic programmatic language and offerings, we were able to continually build a bigger tent because people would see what we were doing and say, why am I not involved in that? I should 100% be involved in that. That really speaks to me. Or, I can see myself there, or that runway doesn't intimidate me. That runway looks like an inclusive, fun place that people belong. And that was the goal, right? And so one of the sort of landmark moments in our organizational trajectory was fall 2018, when after a sort of long thread conversation between myself and Melissa Leylon, the director of the Arkansas Coalition of the Marshallese, we realized that we should produce a Marshallese fashion show. First sort of effort of its kind, frankly, ever, I think. And I cannot understate how incredibly rewarding the experience was, but also how much it unlocked potential for us across Northwest Arkansas, across communities, and really sort of blew the door open in terms of what we understood our organization could do. So in that way, to say that the relationship was mutually beneficial is, I think that we as Interform, or as Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum at the time, we provided this really fun opportunity, but what we learned about what we could do and who we could do things with was, I think, more valuable than anything we could have ever anticipated. So anyway, we did this Marshallese runway show, and we took 5 designers from the Marshallese community. We provided materials and some structure for them to create garments for a runway show in fall 2018. And it was just such a beautiful, amazing highlight of my career, and showed just how deep and broad the creative talent in the region is. It's so much more than we really think that it is. Marshallese culture is very involved in garment production and for cultural events, right? So one of the things that they do in the Marshall Islands is they create sort of not uniforms or costumes, but sort of like matching dresses for different events, for birthdays and celebrations and things like that. And making those dresses specifically is a cultural skill that has not been transitioned to younger generations as they've moved to the United States. And it's something that the community members that we've worked with have been so incredibly interested in rebuilding that skill set and like re-honing the ability for the to pass that information across generationally, but then also to update that information. So, you know, what is it to think about Marshallese activewear? What is it to think about Marshallese office wear? And just for funsies, I included a picture of myself in this dress that they made for me. That was, again, like I have to say, one of the highlights of my career, absolutely. You know, this program started a 3-year project that we're still working on today, which is Marshallese sewing classes and sewn trades production. So, you know, tomorrow, 4 Marshallese women are going to go to our office in downtown Springdale and take an advanced sewing class where they will learn to, I think last week they learned handbags and next week they're learning patterning from a designer that we have in-house named Basna Chetri. And the fact that this show, this like on a lark show that Melissa Leilon and I decided to put together has led to such long-term programming, I think is a testament to the way the programming is built specifically to follow the interest and not to sort of say like, we're not collecting communities, right? We are trying to embed potential new opportunities for collaborative growth into threads of community. Moving on, this is fall 2019. This is the last runway show we did before COVID. I was getting very wistful as I was looking at these images. So around fall 2018, there was a real split in the organization. Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week was a for-profit organization. I pursued a 501c3 to bust out educational programming from Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week. That was called Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum. Over the course of 2018 and 2019, the power structure changed between the two organizations. So rather than being a for-profit led organization with an educational arm, we became an educational organization with a for-profit sort of revenue center. And so that was the difference between Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum and Northwest Arkansas Fashion Week as they sort of became, as Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum, the little sister organization sort of became the umbrella organization. And so that process started, you know, through understanding that sure, we could charge runway fees for private boutiques to have shows, and sure, we could charge for expensive tickets because we're a fancy fashion company. But at the end of the day, the thing that we were really getting good at was educational programming, community building, community outreach. And we really wanted to sort of turn our focus and let that start to drive the program. So what you're looking at here is an example of, it's a result of our first ever designer cohort program. This is a designer, Rosie Rose. And so after several years of working with designers one-on-one, I realized that, you know, they were growing so much in skill set, but also understanding of the importance of inclusivity on their parts, and understanding the sort of different ways that fashion can touch different communities. We're sort of all learning this together, right? And so we started the designer cohort program, and that took 10 designers, and we worked with them over the course of a couple months to really help focus on building some professionalized skill into their practice, but then also pushing them harder on like, why are you making what you're making? Who are you making it for? What are the images that you're making? How are you developing your brand? Because if we want to continue to grow the community that we love so much, we are going to have to start thinking very seriously about professionalization and about marketing and about the ability for people to make money on these programs. But simultaneously, as we're pushing our designers on these fronts, they're pushing back on us and saying, you know, you say you're inclusive, but how come we've never seen people with different, with limb differences on the runway? How come we've never seen people with, you know, with, and I forget, this is like a backpack that holds a feeding, like a feeding apparatus for this woman who has a tube into her stomach. And like, to create that as a fashion moment is so beautiful, you know. And as Rosie pitches these concepts to us, we're always saying, you're right, I'm absolutely right. We haven't seen that on the runway, and now's the time. Like, let's absolutely do it today. And so just like continuing to build the tent and continuing to find people who have entered our sphere and said, I want to get involved, I want to be on the runway, I want to be a part of this community, and just always saying yes and. So Rosie, I mean, and as a tribute to her, she truly is, more than any designer we've worked with, just so dedicated to getting a vision across, and to including people in a way that is so thoughtful, and that is, you know, so true to like creating these like beautiful moments. So this is fall 2019, and like I said, this is the last show we did before COVID, and this was our largest show ever. It was, you know, Fashion Week is a huge event. The community, the buy-in is something that I never expected. I love that we have the opportunity to do what we do because of it. But again, I'll say the reason behind the success is not particularly anything that we have done, as much as it is continuing to pass the mic and say, you have an idea, fantastic, let's go. You have another, you know, you have an idea of a group of individuals that need to be spotlit or put on the runway, or that we need to incorporate into our collaborations, bring it on. And the community that Fashion Week brings together is anywhere between 200 and 300 people backstage. That's just backstage before you even get to front of house, which is between 400 and 500 people who are like actively participating in this collaborative moment of creation. So, you know, for me, I don't know if you can tell, but for me, this is so much more enriching and true to my curatorial instincts than working in art was, because I was never able to get art to do this, right? And this is always what I wanted art to do. I wanted art to open doors to understanding, to expanding the idea of what's possible in the community. And, you know, I was never able to get art as an artifact to push that far. And so for me, getting into the fashion space and saying, this is an activist space, this is not a purely commodity space, this isn't a commercial space, this is a space where embodiment is constructed and deconstructed. And the inherent understanding of the politics of the body get to be present, right? Like all of our bodies are these physical manifestations of all kinds of conditions, right? Of our cultural conditions and our economic conditions, our social conditions, and they're all beautiful in their own specific ways. And they show so much about difference, but difference as a positive, right? Difference as a sort of like a bountiful thing, that difference is to be embraced, selected, and then really like showcased. So yeah, so and I think I learned this as we were going. This is another one of the designer cohorts. She focuses on making hats specifically. She, Marquia is her name, and it's, you know, to see the kind of level of craftsmanship move beyond just garment production, right? We're thinking about artisanal hat production. We're thinking about accessories. We're thinking about, you know, any kind of wearable art, essentially, and really elevating these handmade objects to the level of art. And so, you know, then COVID hit. And we obviously had to cancel Fashion Week. We were unable to do any kind of public programming, as we understand it, for the course of 2020. And as an organization who is really dedicated to community building and really, really dedicated to programming to our audience and with our audience, we were, you know, we were pretty blind. Everybody was blindsided by this pandemic. I mean, that was not special to us. I'm sure the Shiloh Museum was also absolutely at a loss for what to do during those first few months. So what we did, in large part, thanks to the relationships that we built through our collaboration with the Marshallese community, was we were able to quickly pivot to the production of fabric face masks, and really activate community networks that we had built over the last several years of really honing in on community messaging and audience building and collaboration, and activate those networks and activate those people and activate those channels of communication to get face masks made and donated to the community. So, you know, for me, those 3 years of really sort of grassroots asking our audience, what would you like to see? Do you want to be involved? How can we get you involved? Paid off in spades when it came time to flip around and say, okay, now we need to activate to help the rest of the community. And so, you know, through that process, we understood that an idea we had had previously about the creation, we'd had an idea about small batch production. Like, what if we made this stuff? What if we made the stuff on the runway in small quantities with the network that we had, so that we can sell it back to, you know, so that people can have access to this. Like, this collection, for instance, is by a designer named Ruby Roo. And while it's 100% wearable, you could walk off the runway in any of these garments, you can't get access to it because there's no production mechanism for it. So the designer is still just making these one by herself. So we really saw this as a limitation for ourselves and for the designers we work with. So we had set our sights on small batch manufacturing, thinking that we would boot that up sometime in 2023. But, you know, we stopped producing runway shows. So we just pivoted all of our energy over into the production of small batch goods. And at that point, when we realized that we were going to be both the production facility and the showcase opportunity for this new notion of stone trades apparel production for community-based production, that's when we sort of realized that maybe what we were doing was bigger than Fashion Week, and it was bigger than Arkansas Arts and Fashion Forum. And that's where we decided to rebrand to Interform. And so through the rebrand to Interform, we've sort of been able to open up and unlock a significant amount of new space to play in. And the motto that's always been in the back of my head, which is why I sort of chose this image as my last image on the slideshow, is the success that we've had, the success that we've been able to unlock through our organization started with and has continued to exist within our ability to show the community back to itself. Because everyone wants to see themselves represented. Everybody wants to feel like they exist beyond their own embodiment, and finding ways to craftfully, to creatively, and to very respectfully present opportunities for that ability to see oneself represented has given us the ability to work in cultural spaces and with communities that have been historically thought of as hard to reach, or historically thought of as underserved. And part of the reason behind that, I think, is because it's not about taking an image and projecting it back to the world. It's about co-creating an image that's sort of agreed upon. So, so all of that to say, Interform is now embarking on a whole set of cultural programs in downtown Springdale that we're very, very excited for, and that we hope will be able to bring this like continued collaborative energy to. We have a set of exhibitions opening in June in downtown Springdale. Currently the title is the Interform Art Annual. It will be getting a new title. but we've taken a group of 6 curators, 6 young artists from the area, and I'm mentoring them through the curation of this sort of really large arts exhibition. And the thing that's so exciting to me about it is this is like entirely 100% full circle from when I started Artemis back in 2001 to 2021. So a 20-year full circle from, you know, collaboratively co-curating exhibitions in Northwest Arkansas, like across the world, back through fashion and runway shows and small batch production, and now back to the starting point, which is essentially this time around, can we make art do the thing that I always wanted art to do in the beginning? And I think we'll find out. What's really exciting about Interform is that as an organization, on the one hand, we can be working on jobs creation, like actual economic opportunities for local communities, producing sewn goods that can be sold back to the community. That's one thing we can do. We can also do art shows, right? We can also do collaborative programming about social justice. We can also do runway shows. Like, we have given ourselves the cultural space to sort of do the thing that our audience thinks would make sense as the next thing, or the thing that they feel like clicks in a way that engages them. But really, like, following the enthusiasm is the thing that we have always tried to do. And, you know, not every organization is as fortunate as our organization to be able to do that. I mean, there are funding considerations, obviously, for all organizations. But the thing that I can sort of say to that is that we have been really lucky that every time we made a gut decision to go with the perhaps less obvious but more enriching direction, it has paid off for us. You know, every time we make the hard decision and we say, okay, this is going to take 6 months to build, and, you know, we're going to have attrition, and maybe the audience will come and maybe the audience won't come, and, you know, but it's really true to the cultural direction we want to go in. Every time we've made that decision, it has ended up being the right decision because it activates audience, it activates community. And as any cultural institution can tell you, you're not, you know, without an audience, without a community, it's really hard to justify your programming. So the sort of programmatic directions that we have gone, I don't say that the audience directs programming. I won't say that we program to the audience specifically, but I will say that we are ear to the ground constantly thinking about what isn't being talked about, or what isn't being shown, or what isn't being highlighted that deserves to have that centered space.